Greetings, fellow freethinkers. The event you're about to watch was hosted by the Centre for Inquiry Ontario, an educational and outreach organization dedicated to promoting and defending science, reason, and free inquiry in every area of human endeavor. My name is Justin Trottier, and as Executive Director of CFI Ontario, I would like to take a minute to tell you about us. Our centre, located in the heart of downtown Toronto, is the first Canadian branch of CFI and is our nation's first dedicated meeting and event space for humanists and freethinkers. Our mandate encompasses a robust public education presentation series throughout Ontario, campus outreach as we support a growing network of student freethought groups, community outreach and social services to provide humanistic alternatives to religiously monopolized services and activities, and a lending library and media center that, among other things, broadcasts videos like this across the planet. To learn more, please visit us at cfiontario.org. To get on our email list or to learn how you can support our movement or get a freethought group started at your campus, simply contact us today at info@cfiontario.org. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the video.
It's kind of louder than usual. I was going to say something like, "Are you ready to rock?" Yes? Yeah? Okay, then you're in the wrong place. That's not a freaking concert. I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know. Saying, "Are you ready to talk philosophy?" doesn't sound as exciting. So, as usual, Justin's not here again, so I'm left doing your intro. So, CFI to you. So what is CFI? CFI is kind of hard to explain, but basically it's captured in the slogan. We promote science, reason, and freedom of inquiry in every endeavor. So if you want to help us do that aspect and have great events like tonight, Dr. David Hitchcock will be talking. You feel free to join the center. It's $60 for most individuals, $20 for students. We feel these are very cheap prices, and you can really contribute to building the center and keeping our programming going. Including in our programming is the upcoming event by this is going to be hard for me to say, Wojtek Swemberg, yes, who's the producer for TVO's The Agenda with Steve Paikin. I don't know how many of you watch the show, but if you do, you might recall recently we had a number of atheist representatives on the importance of faith issue, including them Dr. Buckman, who's a friend of the center, and Professor Ronald D'Souza. So if you want to see him talk, the producer as a person, this is a free event, and he'll be talking about some of the aspects related to the media and our movement and so forth. We also have other events such as Edward Tabash coming up to talk about the constitutional issue in the US and regarding the separation of church and state and so forth. Many other great events, but I'm sure you can check them out on the website and poster and so forth. Once again, you're not here to see me talk, you're here to see Dr. David Hitchcock talk, at least I think so. And so I'll start by introducing him. So Dr. David Hitchcock has been a professor of philosophy at McMaster since, I believe, 1968. I tried to remember what I was doing in 1968, and for some obscure reason I couldn't remember what I was doing at that time. Not sure. Yeah, that's probably it. Where was I? I apparently seem to have forgotten my notes. But Dr. David Hitchcock has written numerous books on critical thinking, including a textbook relating to critical thinking in medicine. And so hopefully he'll spread some of his critical thinking with us tonight. And he's also, I believe, the president of the International Association for Informal Logic, I believe, and Critical Thinking. Is that it? Am I getting it right? Founding president. There you go, even better. So once again, we have all the speakers with resumes too long to memorize, but I suppose that's a good thing rather than having Bob off the street. So rather than me blabbing on, please welcome Dr. David Hitchcock.
Thank you for that introduction, Schreiber. I can't promise to be quite as good with the one-liners as Schreiber is. He assures me that you want me over here? Or you can move this over, actually. I like to be seen as well as heard rather than hide behind the lectern, if that's okay. Oh, I see, you're filming, so you can't film through the poster. Schreiber assured me that he's of German ancestry, and I replied to him that I am of Igbo ancestry from Nigeria. He challenged me to question his ancestry claim, and I challenge him to question mine in return. You ought to have a stapled copy of these quotations that I pulled from here and there. And what I propose to do is to walk through these quotations with you. And I'd like to stop after each sort of segment and invite you to, at that point, ask questions of clarification or make comments, not to have it be drone on for 50 minutes without interruption. And if I don't get to the end of the 4 pages, nothing much is lost, I have to tell you. So the title of the paper, which required a long series of email exchanges between myself and Justin Protagoras before it met the standards, is Early Skeptics, Atheism, Agnosticism, and Religious Dissent in Ancient Western Civilization. I wanted ancient Greece and Rome, but he thought that sounded too highfalutin. But in fact, that's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm not talking about the ancient Near East. I'm not talking about ancient Northern Africa. I'm not talking about ancient civilizations, in Northern and Central and Eastern and Western Europe, north of, that were part of the Greek-speaking world and later the Roman Empire. I'm talking about the civilization that existed among the Greek-speaking peoples scattered around the Mediterranean and the Black Sea in the 8th, 7th, 6th, 5th, and so on centuries before the Common Era, and subsequent civilization in the Roman Empire. And I'm going to look at it insofar abstracting from any influences on that civilization that came out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. So this is pagan ancient Western civilization. In our civilization today, in our culture, the dominant religious conception that comes from Judeo-Christian heritage and theological reflection on their sacred texts and practices, and is also shared by Islam, is of a single God who is a supernatural being that exists beyond the realm of what we can contact and observe with our senses, what we can see and hear and touch and taste and so on, and who is supposed to have created the whole universe that we can observe and that is studied scientifically ex nihilo, out of nothing. Now, this conception is absolutely foreign to the tradition that I am going to be talking about. So you have to try to bracket it and not to read too much of that conception into this tradition. The popular religion of the Greek-speaking peoples from 700 BCE, 600, 500, and so on, was articulated in the poems of Homer and Hesiod, the Iliad, the story of the wrath of Achilles at the end of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey, the story of the 10-year return of Odysseus after the war to his patient wife Penelope, waiting for him. If your wife complains because you're late home, you've got a perfect example. Or your husband, actually. Let's not be sexist about this. And the poems of Hesiod, the Theogony, which means generation of the gods, and a little bit in his works and days. And the very title of Hesiod's poem Theogony, Generation of the Gods, immediately tells you that we're into a different way of thinking about divine beings. First of all, there's more than one of them. And secondly, they're generated. And the very first line of Hesiod's poem Theogony says, first of all, chaos came into being. Now, chaos is not what we mean today by chaos. It's the Greek word chaos. It's just the same word that's become transliterated into English, but it's required a different meaning than it had back then. What it means is a gap. And indeed, our word gap, I suspect, may go back to the root, cha, of chaos. And the gap that Hesiod is speaking about is the gap between heaven and earth. So the supposition is before the world order in which we live, with the earth on which we stand and the heavenly bodies up above that we can see, before that came into being, everything was all together. And then there was a kind of gap, and you have the heaven above and the earth below, who are personified. Heaven is Uranos, after whom the planet Uranus is named. That's just that Greek word. And the earth is Gaia. So the male sky god, heavenly god, Uranos, and the female earth god, Gaia. And this account of creation, which has no gods prior to it, is actually a fairly common pattern in Near Eastern mythology, and indeed one of the two versions of creation in the book of Genesis of the Hebrew Bible is like that. Darkness was on the face of the deep, etc., and you get this splitting apart of the heavens from the earth. In Hesiod, the heaven and earth are personified, and they start going at it in the way that males and females do, and they most of the subsequent generation of the gods is through sexual interaction and female goddess giving birth. So the gods are immortal. That's an assumption of Greek thought generally, and indeed the immortals is kind of a synonym for the divine beings, but they are generated. So they have a beginning. They don't have an end, but they have a beginning. And they certainly don't create, the stuff out of which we and things we encounter and the earth we stand on are made. Maybe those stuffs, in a certain way, are thought of as divine. There's a kind of animism, if you like, in this thought. And in Hesiod's poem, there is a kind of systematization of the stories that were part of the traditions existing in his time, of the names of the various gods, what they did, what they got up to. And in particular, there is a rather savage tale of a conflict between the children of Uranos and Gaia, heaven and earth, and Uranos. I think this is the one where Kronos cuts off the genitals of Uranos with a sickle, and the drops of blood form, and the Titans are created out of this. And then Kronos becomes the subsequent sky god, and he too has a partner, a female earth goddess, and they too have children. And Kronos is doing nasty things, hiding the children in the earth, so they can't come out. And earth is groaning, and the finally Zeus, leads them in a kind of one of the children of Kronos and Rhea, I think is the name of the earth goddess in the second generation, in a revolt against Kronos and that generation of gods, and they win in the battle, and that generation is the Olympian gods that we're familiar with, Zeus being the main one, and the others like Hera and Hephaestus and Athena and all these who are supposed to dwell up on Mount Olympus. Well, these are very humanly conceived gods and goddesses, not particularly morally, praiseworthy, and not the best models to be teaching your children, but it's those stories that the children were reading. They read Homer and Hesiod. If you learned to read, that's what you'd learn. You'd memorize these poems. So the early Greek thinkers who began to reflect about religious matters, and we're talking here the late 6th century, about 500 BCE. You could hardly say that they differentiated themselves as philosophers. They were sort of thoughtful people. They criticized the anthropomorphic popular conceptions, and in particular these stories that the gods were up to things that were morally blameworthy. And the first of these is a very interesting thinker, Xenophanes, who was a poet. Says in his poem, of which we have quite a number of quotations, although not the whole poem, that he wrote this poem at the age of 92. So this gives old folks like me and one or two of you in the audience, and even Schreiber, some hope. So the first quotation here points out a fact that Homer and Hesiod have ascribed to the gods deeds which among men are a reproach and a disgrace. The second one points out the anthropomorphism of the representation of the gods by different cultures, obviously implying that what any particular culture represents a god as being like, insofar as it's simply a projection of characteristics specific to that culture, doesn't have any standing over against that of some other culture. So we have this quotation, Ethiopians say that their gods are flat-nosed and dark, Thracians that theirs are blue-eyed and red-haired. And you can guess, even if you didn't know, what Ethiopians looked like in those days and what Thracians looked like. And in the next quotation, Xenophanes extends this point about the sort of relativism of our conceptions of the gods among different peoples by pointing out how animals would conceive of the gods if they had these conceptions. And so he says, if oxen and horses and lions had hands and were able to draw with their hands and do the same things as men, horses would draw the shapes of God to look like horses, and oxen to look like oxen, etc. So you have... Thank you. You have...
No, I'm not thanking. I'm not giving you any attribute to that. But anyway, I would like to say that yes, if horses had hands, they would do so.
Right. So this is a critique of the anthropomorphic representation of the gods, which was common in the popular Greek religion of the time. I think it's something that serious theologians today have transcended, but is still in some respects part of some people's conception of what God is like. Is some kind of wise old man with white hair and a beard sitting up there in the heavens somewhere. Xenophanes himself was a theist. What he did proposed as a replacement for this anthropomorphic, polytheistic, morally disreputable picture of the gods was to propose the idea of a single God. God is one, greatest among gods and men, not at all like mortals in body or thought. All of him sees, all of him thinks, all of him hears. Without effort, he shakes all things by the thought of his mind. So this is actually a kind of a purification, a theological purification of the popular conceptions of the gods. He doesn't actually give any argument for the existence of such a being, or for there being only one, nor does in what which survives do we have any kind of account of how it could be that a being not at all like mortals in body or thought could, without effort, shake all things by the thought of his mind. So these are rather problematic in terms of any kind of support for them. And interestingly enough, in a passage that I haven't quoted here, he is very cautious about whether this is something that he really knows. So he makes a general point that we can't be sure of our beliefs. So there is a note, despite the somewhat dogmatic sound of this last quotation, of intellectual humility, which is, I think, a welcome note to sound. So I'm going to stop at this point and just ask if any of you have any clarifications or any comment you'd like to make just now. Yes?
I just wonder at the mention of the Ethiopians having the flat nose, whereas in fact any Ethiopians that I've seen have been very sharp-featured people looking like European.
I don't. That's quite true. Ethiopians and Somalians, from that don't have those kinds of noses. So I'm not quite sure why Ethiopians would describe, Xenophanes would describe them that way. Does anybody else know? Do you know?
Well, I would suggest that maybe he's not quite sure who is an Ethiopian and who is something else.
Yeah.
But I had a question actually for you on a different topic.
Sure.
I was just wondering if you could talk about why people believed in gods rather than the fact that some people did. Have you looked it up at why people?
That is actually one of the questions that a number of thinkers considered, and I have some quotations about why people believe in gods, some of which are imply that there are no gods, and others of which are compatible with there being gods, but they're giving some kind of a naturalistic explanation. So this is indeed one of the issues that is being discussed, but I'll come to it when I get there.
Have you considered it yourself?
I have. I don't have any personal position on why people believe in God or gods, except to point out the obvious fact that most people who believe in a god or gods were told at a very early and impressionable age that there was one, and that
I'm not speaking of individuals in this age. I'm talking about
right.
why the Greeks. There's a section in, I think it's the Republic, where Plato discusses the god that must be worshipped in the Republic and the nature of the god. There's no suggestion that the god need exist, but it has to be defined, and people
right.
have to be ordered to worship it.
Right.
Now that.
So
along that line.
To say that most people are told when they're impressionable young children that there is a god or there are gods, of course, doesn't answer the question of how the belief arose in the first place, because that just pushes it back one generation. So I'll come to that. We're going to get there. Yes.
Along the same lines, do we have any, do we know what the average Greek citizen of 500 BCE actually thought about these gods? Was it a kind of mythical stories, or did they seriously believe that Zeus lived on Mount Olympus? What was the actual standard belief at the time?
We may know, but I don't know. One of the difficulties, of course, is that, you know, people were not doing surveys of public opinion in those days. One of the clues to beliefs about the afterlife is the sort of thing that gets said at funeral orations and so on. Now that's a little bit to the side of the issue of whether people really believe these stories. But it's quite clear from the kind of criticism that you see in Xenophanes and in other figures, including Plato, and Heraclitus is another one, that thoughtful people who were writing about this were skeptical about these stories. And I would say also that one of the features of ancient Greek civilization was that there was no enforcement of dogma. Plato, in fact, is peculiar in recommending that there be enforcement of dogma. What was required is that you participate in the civic rituals and you know, that you sort of acknowledge at least the god of the goddess of the city. But what beliefs went along with that, as far as I can tell, there was not a huge amount of specification of that or requirement of that. And in fact, one of the characteristics of ancient Greece, which I think helps to explain why it was there that philosophy and science and free inquiry originated, is that there wasn't a kind of priestly control of the civilization. In fact, what you had is a lot of small, independent city-states, more than 100 of them, each of whom had, you know, their own way of doing things. So I think there was a freedom to take all of this with a grain of salt, and people did. As to how many did and how many didn't, I don't know. Okay, yes?
You do indeed mention right here free inquiry. And you say that there was some free inquiry in that doctrine. There was free inquiry. How do you know that? I mean, how? What
we have.
Leads you to suppose this?
No, we have testimonies and quotations of thinkers from in the 500s BCE, the 6th century BCE, who put forward accounts of the origin of the cosmos that made no reference whatsoever to the gods.
Can I ask what year you made this
The earliest one was a guy named Thales who predicted an eclipse that took place in 585 BCE. So he evidently was thinking about this, you know, early in that century. You don't have a precise year.
I'm not asking for precise.
Yes. So, and these are complete inventions. I mean, there's nothing in the tradition that's anything like this. And the method of, for example, one of them was a guy named Anaximenes who thought that initially there was just a kind of air or mist, and that it had the power to transform itself, and somehow began to do so, and got, by condensing and rarefying under its own initiation, developed into the different kinds of things that we see. It got more rare, it became like wind and air, and fire. If it got more dense, it became like water and fire and stone. And so all of
Right.
this is a kind of naturalistic, a very crude, but naturalistic
Yeah, but that
account of the origin of
Chemically
the cosmos.
nonsense.
So this guy just invented this. I mean, he wasn't passing on,
But that's chemically, that's nonsense, chemically.
yes. But it is free inquiry. That's the question. Yes.
No,
You're
no,
saying there's no enforcement of dogma. What happened to Socrates?
Socrates was convicted of impiety and sentenced to death. On the ground, the charges were corrupting the young, not believing in or recognizing, you can translate that word "nimize" in two different ways, the gods of the city, and substituting new divinities. This was really a trumped-up charge. It was a camouflage for blaming him for the tyranny that had taken power in Athens, because some of his close associates had been leading figures in that, but you couldn't bring a charge on those grounds because of an amnesty.
Most of the charges of the Inquisition were trumped up, but they were still enforcement of dogma.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Horrendous.
this was, we would need to get into some discussion, you know, about this.
Actually, I think
But I would think that this fact is quite consistent with what I said, that what you were required to do was to acknowledge the gods of the city. There was no set dogma. There's nothing like, you know, the Council of Nicaea or the other dogmas of the Catholic Church that were being enforced through the Inquisition. All right, let me proceed. The next quotation takes us to the 5th century BCE, so the 400s, and indeed even into I guess Protagoras was about 490 to 420, if I remember my dates correctly. And he was one of an interesting group of thinkers in the 5th century BCE in the Greek-speaking world, called sophists. The word sophistry nowadays refers to specious argument, and indeed some of these people were in fact teaching you, how to argue in specious ways. But the word in those days simply meant, historically, somebody with a skill. So even a carpenter would be a sophist of a kind. But these people professed to have a skill that they could impart, in particular the skill of persuading people through speech, whether in the assembly or in the law courts. And this is a skill in demand because of increasing democratic forms of government in Athens, but also in some other ancient Greek city-states. And they would go around from city to city, and they would charge money for, a course, in which you would learn these skills. Protagoras was, I think, the most theoretical and most respected of these people. Plato, in his writings, generally disparages the sophists, doesn't have very many good words to say about them. But when Protagoras is a figure in his dialogues, as he is in a couple of them, he's actually treated with quite a bit of respect. And he talks back to Socrates in a way that a lot of Socrates' interlocutors do not. And we have a quotation which apparently was the first sentence in a work of Protagoras called On the Gods. We don't have anything else from this work, and it's actually a nice puzzle as to what the rest of the work would have been like after you read this sentence. But it's very clear that this is an absolutely explicit statement of agnosticism. Concerning the gods, I am unable to know either that they are or that they are not, or what their appearance is like. For many are the things that hinder knowledge, the obscurity of the matter, and the shortness of human life. So they're interesting to notice some features of this agnosticism. First of all, it's not just a confession that he does not in fact know, but it's a claim that he's unable to know. That's a very strong form of agnosticism. And it's not only about the existence of the gods, it's also about the nature of them and the way that they appear. So it's a sort of comprehensive agnosticism. And he gives an argument for it. It's an obscure matter, and life is short. Okay? So I leave it to you to reflect upon what the rest of this work on the gods would have been after this opening. Okay. Next, we have an account from the ancient atomist Democritus, who actually comes from the same city as Protagoras and Abdera in Thrace, where these blue-eyed, red-haired people supposedly were. And this is one of the explanations of why people believe that there are gods, that is in the ancient tradition. It shows that the question was being thought about. Democritus thought that the only thing that existed in the universe ultimately were atoms, which were indivisible. That's what the word atom means. Little particles, too small to be seen, that were eternal. Each atom always had existed and always would exist, and all that was going on, these things were just moving around, bumping into one another. Nobody was planning it. Nobody created them. It just happened, and they formed compounds in what he thought was a kind of mechanical way. And he supposed that there was void for them to move around in, which he thought was non-being. So we have being in the form of indivisible atoms, and we have non-being in the form of void. So pretty clearly, there's no room in this picture of the universe for gods unless you conceive of gods as composed of atoms, of being physical beings just like you and me. And so it would be a problem, presumably, for somebody with this view to account for the fact that people believe that there are gods. Where did this belief originate if there are no gods? And here's his explanation. When human beings of olden times saw the happenings above, such as thunder and lightning, thunderbolts and conjunctions of planets, and eclipses of the sun and the moon, they were frightened, thinking that the gods were causes of these things. So these are sort of unusual celestial and atmospheric phenomena that kind of terrify people, and his supposition is that people being frightened of these supposed that there were some powerful beings who were responsible for them, and presumably you would then have to placate these beings.
I'm sorry, who wrote this? Because you keep saying he, I've heard this a couple of times.
Democritus. Do you have a copy?
No.
Okay, there's a handout with the name. Okay, this is a guy named Democritus, who was one of the originators of the atomic theory, which originally is the theory that everything is ultimately composed of indivisible atoms.
Right.
Okay?
Thank you.
Right, you're welcome.
Sorry to interrupt.
Fine. If you need clarification, don't hesitate to interrupt.
Well.
Okay, and we have another quotation from him, which is another explanation of the origin of belief in the gods, maybe alternate, or perhaps you would put the two of them together. The idea that in dreams people imagine, or they have these images, in fact, impinging on them. So there's a kind of atomistic explanation, perhaps, of how these images are formed, of large and overgrown beings who foretell the future You know, people dream about someone telling the future, and they hear these prophecies, and then Democritus supposes identified the beings in their images with gods and attributed indestructibility to them. So that was another explanation. And we have in another sophist named Protagoras up on the next column a third explanation of the origin of belief in the gods. And this is the sort of a deification of aspects of the universe that we can observe from which we get benefits. So Protagoras writes, the ancients accounted as gods the sun, moon, rivers, and springs, and in general all of the things that are a benefit for our life because of the benefit derived from them, even as the Egyptians deify the Nile. So bread in this way was worshipped as Demeter, wine as Dionysus, water as Poseidon, etc. So this is a reductionist account of belief in the various divinities of Greek popular religion. What Demeter is just a personification of bread. There is no goddess Demeter, there's just bread. There is no god Poseidon, there's just water. There is no god Dionysus, there's just wine. By the way, all of these explanations of the origin of belief in the gods are going to be criticized in a passage that I might get to, but in any case it's later on in the handout. A fourth explanation of the existence of the gods is in this long excerpt from a play called Sisyphus, written by a man named Critias and performed for the first time in 406 BCE, towards the end of the war between Athens and Sparta, and about 6 or 7 years before the trial and death of Socrates. And this attributes the origin of belief in the gods to an invention by a specific individual for a specific reason. I should say that Critias was not a sophist. He was in fact an Athenian from a sort of highly placed wealthy family, with old money and land, a relative of Plato, who was one of the leaders of the tyranny that took power in Athens in 404 and 403 BCE, which is a very bloody regime. Thousands of people, by some estimates, were killed on the bloody side of the thing. So he's not a very admirable figure. And we don't, in fact, know whether he himself believed the theory that's put forward in these lines, because it's lines spoken by a character in a play that he wrote. So who knows? But here's the theory. So the theory was around anyway, whether he believed it or not. And it envisages a kind of state of nature of the sort that Hobbes in his Leviathan refers to, before there was any system of laws and justice. And this idea of this original state of nature was around in the Greek-speaking world of the 5th century in various places, not just in this excerpt from the play. Hobbes got it from there, I think. He translated Thucydides into Latin, and it's in Thucydides. So the idea is, without laws and without punishment for the bad and rewards for the good, there's going to be just violence and force, and life, in the words of Hobbes, will be nasty, poor, solitary, brutish, and short. So law and justice is introduced in order to, put an end to this kind of force and violence. Justice would have violence as its slave, and anyone wrong would be punished. All well and good, but this only is effective if you believe that you're actually going to be found out as having committed some ill deed. Such deeds were done in secret, according to the speaker here, even after the laws and justice were introduced to prevent violent deeds from being done. So some shrewd man, wise in counsel, discovered fear of God in mortals, thereby to frighten those who in secret do some evil deed or word or thought. He introduced the divine being. This is an invention. Saying that there is a spirit who enjoys endless life, hears and sees with his mind, thinks of and heeds these things. So you've got to have a God who is aware of what everybody is doing and who is concerned about it and is going to punish you if you do something wrong, even if no other human being knows that you've done it wrong. Able to see everything that's done. It won't escape the God's notice. He said these words, this person who introduced the divine being, and introduced a most cunning doctrine, concealing the truth in a false story. So this explanation, we got 4 explanations now of the origin of belief in the gods. This one is clearly implies that there really are no gods, that this is a sheer invention thought up by some wise person to get people to behave when nobody is looking. And the truth that is concealed in this false story, we're not told exactly what it is, but you can speculate. Well, this is a good point for me to pause, because we've got 4 answers to your question. You know, why do people believe that there is a God or gods? Yes?
Okay.
Yes.
That last quotation is very much in line with Plato's thinking in the Republic, the regulation of society.
It's in line with Plato's thinking in the Republic, and even more so in the laws, with the exception that in these writings, Socrates or the Athenian, the visitor from Athens, who are evidently stand-ins for Plato, argue that, or at least claim, that there are gods and that they care about human beings. They're not indifferent, and they can't be bribed. Those are the 3 dogmas that in the laws the visitor from Athens wants to be enforced in this colony that they're imagining setting up. So yes, you're right. And Critias being a relative of Plato's, I think there's, it's not just a coincidence. Yes, here.
When you're talking about the Democritus quotes, you touched on this idea of dreams, that some of the images he was talking about were dream images.
Yes.
I was just wondering how important dreams were to these people in terms of being, divine or whatever, because they perhaps did not understand what they were. Did it have an awful lot of weight in that society, or is there evidence?
Did dreams have an awful lot of weight in ancient Greece? They seem to have. Even Socrates, who, in some respects is shown in Plato's dialogues as a very rational figure, and he wants people to articulate their fundamental beliefs about the principles on which they're acting, and subjects them to inquiry by trying to refute them from the person's own admissions. Even he is shown as, having had a dream in the beginning of Plato's Phaedo, and as something that said something like follow the muses, and thinking, well, maybe it meant that he should be writing poetry, so he started writing some verse. He in the Crito, when he's visited by his old friend Crito in the prison, he said he had a dream that somebody said, in 3 days you will go to fertile Thea, and he had to mean that his execution would be 3 days from then. So he gave credence to these beliefs. And I think, who knows why we dream? We don't know, I think. We don't think that it's, some kind of revelation from the gods. I think the Democritus may have had a view like that of a later Adamist thinker, who's quoted later on. I might get to him. That the dreams are actually things that come to us physically by particles of atoms kind of entering our body in when we're sleeping, things that we more noticeable, just in the way that when you're sleeping you hear very small sounds that you wouldn't. Why is something?
Just the general attitude in gods that believe in dreams.
Later than the time we're talking about. So this would be 4th century BCE, around, let's say, 3. It's a view, but the fact that he felt that a lot of people did think that you got, yes.
Actually, and she said if that's a normal thing to,
and then we'll see.
Yes, George says so. This is a life that I would like if we were going to discuss dreams.
I'll talk about dreams insofar. Yes.
Biological evolution of perception, and we as human beings, with a survival with human beings, not all things. And what I'm thinking is comes with that's inherent of concepts. We persuasion that
I'm not going to. Let me just try to see if I've understood what you all that. That is, we interpreted these laws, and then we perceive, and we conceive of. That's your thought. I guess I would. You would need to answer before we conquer.